Good morning, I'm Cody Libolt, and this is a video addressing a video from AD Robles. AD and I go way back, maybe 4, 5, 6 years. We've been acquaintances and we've done some videos together, and so we've talked to each other on the phone a lot. We know each other, and we have found ourselves on different sides of the Christian nationalism discussion. AD, for as long as I've known him, has called himself a general equity theonomist, which is something in line with Doug Wilson's views. And it is connected to the work of R.J. Rushdoony, but it's more of a R.J. Rushdoony light, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong there. But the idea is we should be doing more to make the laws in our country like the laws of ancient Israel, as seen in the book of Deuteronomy and the rest of the Pentateuch. So that's the general approach that he has to laws, and I'm coming from a different approach. And I think it's a theological discussion, not just a political one. The question is, on what basis do we advocate for laws to be this or that? And this is the kind of discussion that it really ought to be had among Christians, because we cannot just assume that we know. We should think about it. So I've had a lot of complaints over the last couple of years about the group of people that are more on the theocratic or theonomic side of the spectrum, simply begging the question or assuming, hey, if you don't agree with me that this should be the law and that this should be the framework that we use to approach the law, that they would say, well, then you just hate the Bible, or you hate the law of Moses, or you hate the law of God. They would say things like that. That was something that Marcus Pittman told me at one point, one of the guys that hangs out with the Canon Press crowd and Cross Politic, and I think on Twitter he's I'm King Ginger or something like that. And, Marcus and AD, they know each other. So this is a discussion that we're having together about Deuteronomy. And, okay, so what, do you think we should be executing people based on their beliefs? Or based on their teaching other people? Like, for example, somebody comes to you and they say, you should worship this false god. Should we execute them? Is that your position? Because that would have been the law in the time of Moses. And so there's this whole debate that goes back for years. This debate between the American Vision crew and Joel McDurmon, and they would advocate in the past for a theocratic system. They were Reconstructionists, just to give you some context. Christian Reconstructionism, if you want to look it up. Well, Jordan Hall, J.D. Hall, did a debate with Joel McDurmon, I don't know, maybe about 10 years back, and it's on YouTube and you can look it up, and it's really interesting stuff, because this group of people that are Presbyterians that are following in the trend of R.J. Rushdoony, they have strong convictions that this is the right moral system for Christians to be advocating for. And so it's not just, here's my opinions, but it's, here's my theological system, and if you disagree with my theological system, then you're teaching falsely. You're ignoring God's teaching. You're not actually advocating for what you should as a Christian. It doesn't just mean I disagree with you, it means that the teaching of the church is at stake. Well, it's been universally recognized, almost, that Jordan Hall prevailed in that debate with Joel McDurmon, and that he showed that this is ridiculous, that the idea of trying to advocate for a strong theonomic view is not consistent with Reformed theology, and that it just doesn't have basis in the teaching of Christ and the New Testament, and in our understanding theologically of how the Old and the New Testament fit together. So that's some context, and interestingly enough, even Joel McDurmon abandoned his theonomic position after that debate. So that's how hard he was defeated. And so then the debate hinged partly on the question of the punishments. Should somebody be punished legally by the way that Moses would have in the Old Testament, by the way that the law of God said in the Old Testament for the people of Israel? And Jordan Hall said, we've got to define your position as that's what you are advocating. And then he disproved it. He said that we as Christians today do not have a call from God to do that kind of thing. At least not according to that framework, not according to that approach that you, the theonomists, are advocating. So that's some important context. Now, along come the Christian Nationalists. Christian Nationalists are not necessarily Ventilians or Rushdoonians, or they're not necessarily theonomists. Although you could say that what they're doing is kind of like theocracy, kind of like theonomy. But what's the difference? Well, partly, Stephen Wolfe comes from the natural law tradition and is more consistent with traditional Protestantism, especially Calvinism, and he likes Althusius and references Althusius. He also is rooted in even the thought of other thinkers that are not Christians. So he'll go back to Aristotle and he'll claim some basis in Aristotle's ideas. And so as far as the way that he overall approaches this issue, Stephen Wolfe is more in line with the way I would approach the issue, which is I don't necessarily limit myself to the biblicist approach that you see within the Van Tillian presuppositionalists and that you see within R.J. Rushdoony. I'm not a biblicist. In other words, I don't think that in order to know that something is right or wrong, that you have to be able to point to where it is in the Bible, and I don't think that you have to limit your knowledge of how the world works and what political systems are just and unjust to just what you can see in the Bible. I don't think that that's the way you should approach knowledge. You can see how presuppositionalism and that whole field of discussion comes to bear in this. Well, so Stephen Wolfe comes in and he actually gets promoted by Doug Wilson, which is interesting because Doug Wilson is relatively a fan of Rushdoony type ideas, relatively, but he's somewhere in the middle because he would say he's a libertarian theonomist. I'm like, oh, okay then. So you don't know really where Doug Wilson stands on a lot of things, but he promotes Stephen Wolfe's book because he thinks that it's useful for moving the dialogue forward. And to some extent, I would agree that the dialogue did need to happen and that it's good that it's happening. So now we have Stephen Wolfe presenting this idea of moving back to perhaps a monarchical society or perhaps a constitutional republic that's different than the one that we have today, that is not grounded in the same understanding of, for example, cognitive liberty. Stephen Wolfe would argue against the idea that people have the right to teach that there's no such thing as the Trinity. So if a pastor at a church was teaching against the Trinity, Stephen Wolfe would probably say you need to put a fine on him or you need to put him in jail. So that's the context. That's kind of connected to the R.J. Rushdoony Christian Reconstructionism theonomy movement as well. It's similar conclusions with different arguments. So then AD, excuse me. So then AD and I have gone back and forth on Twitter on some of these topics. We've talked in person on some of these topics. And here in 2024, this is the discussion that we're having. So let me share with you some of the discussion. So AD made a video a couple of days ago where he was addressing Michael O'Fallon, and where he was talking about Michael O'Fallon using deceptive tactics. And he did not necessarily ascribe motive, and he sort of waffled on his criticism, but in there were some clear statements to the effect that Michael had been being deceptive. And then he also implicated me in that, as well as Bill Roach. And when he did that, I thought to myself, wow, that really stinks. And I told AD that. I said on Twitter, this stinks. Like, I don't like the fact that you are telling me that you think I'm being deceptive or not following truthful methods, because it's a big deal to me to follow truthful methods. I thought about this topic a lot. I've written a lot about it. I have attempted to follow my own advice on it. When people on my own side are making cheap arguments or making arguments that are confusing, misleading, deceptive, overstating the case, not representing the other person with accuracy, I have attempted privately to go to them and say, hey, don't do that. And here's why. And it's cost me some things sometimes. Like, it's caused turmoil in my life. So this is how committed I am to the idea of methods of truthfulness and accuracy in representation. And so when I hear AD say, Cody's being deceptive, I think, well, that really stinks, because I care about his opinion. And I actually value his judgment on this issue. Now, there are some things where I would say I just don't care what you think about. But if he looks at an argument that I make and he says, I can't even see how that's reasonable, and I think that you're getting it totally wrong, Cody, I do care about that. I really do. And it means something to me to know that my opponents on this side of this discussion, my brotherly Christian opponents, who I consider to be brothers, it means something to me that they could look at what I'm saying and they could say, well, I disagree with your conclusions, but you're not cheating. That would be a nice thing if that could happen. And I realized that that's not how AD was thinking about something I said the other day or whatever. And so I don't know what his referent was because he didn't name it. in that particular video. And so I asked him, what's your referent here? Because I can't really change if I don't know what you're talking about. And so he makes this other video, and the other video came out a couple days ago, and it talks about Cody, Libolt, and Christian Nationalism. I forget the title of his video. But his video engages for about 20 minutes or more with a Twitter post that I made. And so I'll share with you my reactions to that. I've already gave these reactions on Twitter in a thread. So what I'm going to do in the remaining part of this video is share with you what I said in that Twitter thread. Some context going into this are, one, the thread that AD was interacting with was something that I posted last May 2023, and now it's April 2024. So also the thread that I made then was not necessarily addressing AD, and the reason being that the thread was discussing Christian nationalism, and at the time I don't recall if AD was self-describing as a Christian nationalist. But what I do know is that some of the things that I said at that time were pretty strong about, hey, this is where the debate has gone and it's degenerated, and therefore I think you should just block all these people because they're mockers. Now, is that true? Well, I stand by it. I stand by what I said at the time, but I did not necessarily mean to apply it to AD Robles, who since then has become, I think, more open about identifying as a Christian nationalist. So it wasn't really a thread about him, and I think that you can understand what I said in my Twitter thread better if you'll understand that I wasn't talking to AD. I didn't know that AD was going to be the recipient of it. I was talking about a general group of people. And it's important when you try to exegete somebody's description or somebody's writing that you don't read yourself in as the main character. That would be called narcigesis. So I'm going to suggest that that's important. So let me read to you what I said. So AD Robles, thanks for the video interacting with my post. Your video was called Christian Nationalist Secrets Exposed, Cody Libolt tweet. And then there was also another video which is called Michael O'Fallon with All the Best Deceptions, Doug Wilson on Tucker, and so on. So I said to AD, you were charitable toward me. I can tell that you're trying to answer my question from the other day about, hey, how am I being deceptive? Now, in the video that you made explaining how you think I'm being deceptive, I asked AD, do you mean to imply that I have misrepresented the views of a specific person, or that I have misrepresented the general views being accepted within the self-described Christian nationalists? I said, I'm ready to correct the record if you have issue with factual claims that I have made. And he responded, in your case, it's really the general issue. It's not like you've misrepresented a specific person, but I think that you're overstating. I think that was his concern. You're overstating, like, this is what every Christian nationalist believes. Okay. So he said he'll call me out when he has the opportunity, and that's what led to him making that other video where it's explicitly about me. Now, I told him the temptation to overgeneralize, to misrepresent is a big deal. It stinks to hear I messed up. Can you name the error? I'm looking for a clear way to fix the behavior if you are right in your concern. And so that's some context. Another part of the context is, just to lay it out there, I have seen a lot of disparaging comments about my brother and my friend Jacob Brunton from people that AD associates with, such as Joel Webbin. Like, Joel Webbin was telling Jacob on Twitter stuff like, y'all just let him go, he's a Thomist. Whether it be Aristotle or James Lindsay, his highest devotion is to pagans, not scripture, principled polytheism, lover of idols, loathing God's law. This is the kind of accusation that some of the people that AD Robles associates with are leveling at my friend, my brother, and my ministry partner and podcast co-host, Jacob Brunton. And so I have concerns about that. So that's some context to bring into why I would have said what I said. But in the thread that I posted, I said, you ought to just block these Christian nationalist guys. They are mockers. They're scoffers. That was the kind of thing that I was saying. All right, scrolling through my notes a little bit to the next section. So I think that one of the accusations that people level at me or at Jacob Brunton is that if you deny this Rushdunian approach to the law and to Christian political theology, that therefore you are outside of orthodoxy. And I say, well, you can't just state that. You have to name your premise there, and you have to explain your premise. Like, how and when did this become the test, right? I'm not even saying this about Christian nationalists, that they're outside of orthodoxy. Now, I think that a lot of them are, depending on how strong they go on it. But the idea that you ought to pull from the law of Moses and inform laws today, I don't even disagree with that. So it's just a question of how and to what extent. It's when people start saying this is the test of orthodoxy that I say, oh, if you make it a test of orthodoxy, then your understanding of orthodoxy is wrong, which means you're not orthodox. And so you see how that works logically. So that's what I'm doing on Twitter. Let me get back into what I was talking about with AD. So I pointed out to AD, this is sinfully divisive. If you were to say something like, you have to be in agreement with my approach to Christian nationalism in order to be in orthodoxy. And on Twitter, AD would say, well, I'm not going to argue about that. People say all kinds of bombastic stuff all the time, AD says. And I challenged him, would you say something about this? When people say this to me or to Jacob, would you speak up for us? And he'll say, no. That's what he said on Twitter. And I said, well, I can't make you do the right thing, but it is the right thing. And he protests, I don't participate in struggle sessions. Okay, well, struggle session, I'm asking you to stand up for what's right here, for what's just, defend the innocent, define what's innocent correctly. That's the state of the argument. All right, so let me scroll on just a little bit because there's a couple more things I want to share with you. So I pointed out to AD over Twitter, it is true that I have blocked AD in the past. I have. And, but the reason why I've blocked AD is not the same as the reason why I've blocked a lot of the Christian Nationalist anonymous guys. Anonymous guys will, they'll just waste your time. I don't think AD wastes time. I really don't think so. My reason for blocking AD at different times was actually because I really care about him and I don't want to make him look bad in public. That was one of the reasons why I blocked him, because I don't want to waste time fighting my friends or former friends if I don't have to. If I can just ignore him for a while, that would create less turmoil for me. I care about him. And so it's can we just agree to disagree and not talk about this right now? That's the kind of, it's clear that I disagree with him. It's not like I'm hiding that. So it's because of that history that I have with him that I have sometimes blocked him. Now, AD pointed out that he has never tried to hide his beliefs. This is something in his video that he mentioned when he was criticizing me. He suggested that he thought that I was saying that he had hidden his beliefs, and I don't think he's hidden his beliefs. I never said that. So I think that this is something that is important. Is I think that some Christian nationalists have been obscure about defining their positions. For example, William Wolfe, Stephen Wolfe. They've been very difficult to understand at times. But I think that a lot of people became more clear over time. And so when I made my Twitter thread last 2023 May, this was before they'd even made this statement on Christian nationalism and the gospel. So you understand they clarified, but my statement was from before that. So I think in that light it's easier to understand that I was not misrepresenting the level of clarity among the Christian nationalists, even though AD thought that I was. No, there really was a lot of unclarity at that time. And even the Christian nationalists acknowledged it. I think it's been pretty openly acknowledged. So a theme in the concerns that AD raised about me was that I was misrepresenting their level of clarity. And I think if you accept that I'm not referring to AD, because he's a theonomist, not just a other kind of Christian nationalist, I think that that'll help. Now, he raised some other topics as well. He talked about whether Christians should make laws concerning gay people. And I thought that was worth talking about, but not on YouTube. I would just generally say that there should be obscenity laws. There should be laws that protect children especially. Public displays of obscenity should be banned. There should be misdemeanors. In some cases, it should be felonies. So these are the things that we should be talking about. And classical liberals have always been able to talk about it in that way. So this is not something new or that we don't have a solution for. Russell Moore and David French are not classical liberals. And look, I don't speak of the blessings of liberty the way David French does. So it's come on, that's not me, that's not my position. Now, as far as the discussion about what to do if somebody were to break those laws, well, it's the same as with other laws. There should be fines. And there should be other kinds of punishments that are suitable to the crime, especially if it's child abuse. There was a claim about banning atheism, and of course, I think AD tried to make hay about this idea of, oh, you can't ban somebody from what they believe. And I'm always like, okay, get past that talking point. It's cheap and not effective. What we're talking about here is banning public agitation for atheism, right? You understand that that's just shorthand? Do you know what the word shorthand means? Okay, so shorthand is if somebody says they're going to ban atheism, what I mean is they're going to ban signs proclaiming that atheism is true, something like that, right? And I'm absolutely correct in noting that William Wolfe and Stephen Wolfe and Doug Wilson and many others, John Harris, they have been out there saying it should be illegal to blaspheme Jesus Christ, or they've been saying it should be illegal to teach against the Trinity, with those kinds of things. This is not me making it up. This is their real position. All right, let's talk about some other issues that AD raised. So, the 19th Amendment, women voting. He said that he thought that I was terrified of the idea of getting rid of the 19th. I'm not. Actually, I don't think AD knows my position about that. And if you're interested to learn my position, it's consistent with the objectivist position, like Leonard Peikoff. There should be a vote per household. To be able to vote, a household needs to have a certain amount of wealth. That ends up meaning, basically, that the man of the house would be the voter most of the time, unless there was a woman who was the head of household. And so, yeah, sure, I'd be happy to repeal the 19th. I think that it's a weak point if we were trying to win public relations right now, and I think that it's best if we avoid talking about it too much in public. That said, I don't mind people knowing what I think, but honestly, like, we could make a lot more hay against the Christian nationalists if we wanted to by bringing up this topic, but we just don't see a need to, because we thought that you guys would be smart enough to understand this is sort of a mutually assured destruction scenario, and we don't want to get into that if we all start, chanting, down with voting rights for this and that group. It's not going to do any of us any good as far as our short-term goals. We should be clear about what we believe, but I'm not trying to strongly disagree with those people that think that the 19th Amendment and the general direction of our country on those topics is wrong. I'm sympathetic to your views. Okay, that's another point. Now let's go to the next one. Okay, so I would say there was an implication from AD in his video that I was being dishonest about how I represent him on the voting topic, and I reject the implication. Okay, next, on installing an authoritarian Christian government. So AD seemed to be attempting to have his cake and eat it too on that issue, and I can explain how I analyze that in more detail if AD asks, but I just think there was some having my cake and eating it too in that section of his video clip. Especially look at minute 20. So, if you wanted to make a productive discussion about that topic, define authoritarianism. And remember, my post was not a response to AD's views, it was a response to Stephen Wolfe's views and to his fans. Alright, so several times in the video, there was a note that AD had been clear about his positions, and I think he was taking offense. And I just want to say, AD, I apologize for failing to make a bigger deal about this. I mean it. AD, you are quite clear about your positions. You have been for a long time. We could hash that out more if you want, but I don't think that I've ever really accused you of not being clear about your positions, at least not in public. In private, I've questioned, but in public, I've not said, AD, why are you not more clear? When I have asked, you have clarified, and I appreciate that. Okay. So now, AD, in his video, he does say, we have been clear, and the word we needs to be interrogated, because Christian nationalism is amorphous, it's decentralized, and there is really not much of a we, and more people in that movement than not are just not clear communicators, and more people in that movement than not are trollish and evasive. So I wouldn't use that description. I would not say they've been clear. All right, next point. All right, so there was a Christian nationalist who said I would not let a black man on my property. And that's the kind of rhetoric that we hear from Christian nationalists. So when I raise this topic of kinism and concerns about kinism, I think that it's a valid concern. I think that we should be concerned about the kinist element that is happening within the Christian nationalists. We're not just discussing the question of whether it's okay to have an ethno-state like Israel or Japan or something like that. we're not talking about just those things. Like, is it okay for some people in some parts of the world to just marry among themselves? Is it okay for everybody to just marry who they want to marry within limits? So that's not even the discussion of Kinism. The discussion of Kinism is there are people that are saying that it is morally obligatory or morally far preferred to only marry people that look like you genetically, and then to say that it's something like a lack of natural affections if you don't. Like, that's what we're getting at here. And so I will say, AD, on this issue, you have prevaricated, or you have been very unclear. Because you always try to change the subject to like, well, what's wrong with, little old Italian granny that says, I want you to marry a good Italian girl? It's like, sorry, but like, you got to analyze the concerns that your opponents are actually giving you. It's not that. This trend toward white identitarianism and Kinism either is or is not a problem in the Christian nationalist movements, especially in Stephen Wolf's work or in Thomas Acort's work. It either is or is not a problem. Identify what it is that we're talking about, and then tell us whether you think it really is or is not a problem. There's an issue where you've been unclear, AD. And I haven't confronted you on it before, but I am now. All right. So in your video, AD, you offered advice that I should positively define and present my own views. So I thought that was kind of a weird thing. It's like, you don't know that I have a YouTube channel with 1,600 subscribers and maybe 300 videos defining my views on each one of these questions that we've been discussing. And if you're not sure what my views are, if you want me to make a positive case for this or that and do it concisely, I'd be happy to. Like, just ask me and I'll write out a question and an answer and I'll post it. Like, that's what I do a lot. I spend a couple hours every day doing this kind of thing. I'd get on the phone with you privately. I'd get on Facebook Live. I'd get on Zoom. I'd do a Twitter space with you, AD. Like, I guarantee you I've watched a lot more of your videos than you've watched of mine, dude. All right, so about your specific questions on the topic of blasphemy laws or laws on dirty material, dirty magazines. Look, the way I would approach it, let me just answer some of your questions that you raised about that. I define rights negatively. That's important framing for how I understand these issues. So let me know if you're familiar with the idea of negative rights. That would help if I understood where you're coming from, whether you even understand that idea. But we have the right to be left alone in specific areas. That's what rights are. They're negative rights. The proper sphere of government action is understood in terms of preserving negative rights. That's my framework for this. So if you ask, does a person have the right to have a dirty magazine? I would say, no, they do not have a moral right to it. And this is pretty cheap rhetoric to be like, yeah, you think they have a constitutional right to that? No, I mean, like, they have a constitutional right to be left alone. There should not be a statement in the Constitution saying they have a right to have a dirty magazine or internet or whatever. Look, there is not a recognized legal right to have dirty magazines. There is an implied legal right to be left alone by your neighbors or by the police. So, for example, if I know that my neighbor has a dirty magazine, I'm not going to go knock on his door, pound down his door, grab it, and put it in the fire. Like, I don't have the right to enter into his property and do that. And so the question has to be framed in terms of jurisdiction. Do we have the jurisdiction to police the possessions of our neighbors? In what circumstances and for what reasons? Now, there may be exceptional cases. Yes, for example, if dirty magazines involving children or something, right? Or if it's being exposed to children. Obviously, there are exceptional cases. But for the most part, I don't have the right to break down my neighbor's door. And so because I don't have that right to do that, then I cannot delegate that right to the government. And since I cannot delegate it, then the right does not exist. The government officials only can do the things which I would also have the right to do did they not exist. That's the way I conceptualize government and negative rights. So if you understand that, it's like, okay, so that's my answer to that question. So let's get past the cheap rhetoric that says, oh, you think there's a constitutional right to do this bad thing. And like, well, I mean, what if we try to use that cheap rhetoric in other areas? You think there's a constitutional right to lie. Like, well, no, I mean, I just don't think that it's the police's job to track your every speech and then to put you in jail if you do lie, like, except for with some exceptional cases. Like, this is the way reasoning about political theory and law works. Is this the first time you've ever thought about these things? So I'd be glad to share more ideas with you, AD. And I don't claim to have always been correct about everything, or even well-motivated. I don't claim to have always been humble. I don't claim to have always been godly. I know that talking with you about our disagreements is going to help me grow in those areas, and I expect that it'll help both of us grow and see things that we didn't see before. And I see value in this interaction. I appreciate what you're doing, AD, with your video. I appreciate that you took me seriously. I appreciate that you take my concerns seriously. I think that you attempted to be objective, and I am here attempting to be objective and to follow standards of truthfulness. And because of that, I think that there is hope for us to have actual useful discussion, useful to each other, useful to others who could listen to it. Hopefully this has at least answered some of the concerns that you raised. All right, thanks for listening, and God bless.